Star Wars Death Troopers Chapter 2, a reading in horizontal format this time. I know these aren't getting many views, but I'm doing it anyway. Let's rock it on. Do apparently a New York Times bestseller, despite the fact that no one has ever heard of this book before. Chapter 2, Meat Nest. That's a metal name. In Trigg's old life, back on Cimarosa, I don't know. Breakfast had been the best meal of the day. Besides being an expert trafficker in contraband, a veteran fringe dweller who cuts... Besides being an expert trafficker in contraband, a veteran fringe dweller who cut countless deals with thieves, spies, and counterfeiters, Von Longo... If he turns out to be a vampire, if the Longo family turns out to be vampires, that'd be great. Had also been one of the galaxy's greatest unrecognized breakfast chefs. Eat a good meal early, Longo always told his boys. You never know if it's going to be your last. Foreshadowing. Here on the Purge, however, breakfast was rarely edible, and sometimes actually seemed to shiver in the steady vibrations as though still alive on the plate. This morning, Trigg found himself gazing down at a pasty mass of colorless goo spooned into shaved gristle, the whole thing plastered together in sticky wads like some kind of meat nest. Hey, that's the title of the chapter! Assembled by carnivorous flying insects. He was still nudging the stuff listlessly around his tray when Kale finally raised his eyebrows and peered at him. You sleep at all last night? Kale asked. A little. You're not eating. What, you mean this? Trigg poked at the contents of the tray again and shuddered. I'm not hungry, he said, and watched Kale shovel the last bite of his own breakfast into his mouth with disturbing gusto. Rather than regular gusto, rather than wholesome gusto. You think the food will be any better when we get to the detention moon? Oh wait, that's Trigg talking. Sorry. You think the food will be any better when we get to the detention moon? Little brother, I think we'll be lucky if we don't end up on the menu. Trigg gave him a bleak look. Don't give him any ideas. I like them. Gale wiped his mouth on his sleeve and grinned. A guy like you, they'll probably just use you for the appetizer. Trigg put his fork down again with a snort to show that he got the joke. Although he couldn't have articulated, his big brother's easygoing bravado, so obviously inherited from their old man, made him downright envious. Kale wasn't wired for fear. It just didn't stick to him somehow. The only thing that ever really seemed to trouble him was the prospect of not getting another helping of whatever the COO 2180s behind the lunch counter had been slopping onto the inmates' trays. Sorry if I mispronounced COO 2180. I don't know what droid that is. Out of nowhere, from the ridiculous to the sublime, Trigg found himself thinking about his father again. Their final conversation hung in his memory with stinging vividness. Just before he'd passed away in the infirmary, the old man had reached up, clutched Trigg's hand in both of his, and whispered, "Watch over your brother." Caught off guard, Trigg had just nodded and stammered that he would. Of course he would. But soon afterward, he realized that his dad, in his final moments, must have just been confused about which son he was talking to. There was no reason he'd asked Trigg to look after Kale. It would be like assigning the safekeeping of a wampa to a Kowakian monkey lizard. You know, that whole adage. Some danger, and patrol shit right there. What's wrong with you anyway? Kale asked from across the table. I'm fine. Come on, rest up. Trigg pushed the tray aside. I don't see how they could service this stuff day after day, that's all. Hey, I'll arrange it. As if on cue, Kale flicked his eye over at Trigg's tray. You gonna eat that? I like Kale. He's a pig. Even though his name is a fucking vegetable. When the alarm shrilled out to the end of the meal, he and Kale stood up and slipped through the mess hall, along with the sea of other inmates. From overheard observation decks, a retinue of uniformed Imperial Corrections officers and armed stormtroopers stood watch, observing their passage into the common area with soulless black eyes. Down below, the prisoners sauntered in packs, muttering and laughing among themselves, deliberately dragging out the process as much as possible to exploit whatever small amount of leniency the guards granted them. There was a sticky, smelly closeness to their unwashed bodies, and Trig thought of the phrase "meat nest" again, the name of the chapter, and felt a little nauseated. This whole place was a meat nest. This ain't a scene, it's a goddamn meat nest. Little by little, with studied casualness, he and Cale slowed down, falling farther back from the crowd. Although he didn't say a word, a subtle change had already worked its way through Cale's posture, straightening his spine and shoulders, a serene vigilance moving over his face, supplanting the old insouciant glee. I've never read that word. insouciant. Point one for Death Troopers. His eyes darted right and left now, never stopping anywhere for longer than a moment or two. "You ready for this?" he asked, barely moving his lips. "Sure," Trig said, nodding. "You?" "Full on." Nothing about Cale's face seemed to indicate that he was speaking at all. What? Weird. What does that mean? Nothing about Cale's face seemed to indicate that he was speaking at all after saying full on. What a weird line. "Remember when we get down there, it's going to be close quarters. Whatever you do, always maintain eye contact. Don't look away for a second." "Got it." "And if anything starts to feel wrong about it, and I mean anything whatsoever, we just walk away." Now, Cale did glance at his brother's face, perhaps catching a whiff of his apprehensions. "I don't think Sixtus would try anything, but I can't vouch for Miss. Dad never trusted him." A man named Miss. Interesting. "Maybe," Trig started and stopped himself. He realized that he was about to suggest calling off the whole deal, not because he was nervous, although he certainly was, because Cale seemed to be having second thoughts too. "We could do this," Cale went on. "Dad taught us everything we need to know. The whole thing should take no more than a minute or two. We'll be back out of there and back in full view. Any longer than that, and it gets dangerous." He jerked his head around and looked hard at Trig. "And I go first. Clear?" Trig nodded and felt a hand drop on his shoulder, stopping him in his tracks. End of chapter, apparently. That was a short one. It was mostly just about eating breakfast. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. Like and subscribe or whatever. I don't care. Eat a peach.